Power, guests have arrived.
Oh, thank you, Bonnicastle. Hi, folks. Welcome. Come on in. Well, this is the last of our series. Sort of mixed feelings. Nice for all of us, I'm sure, to get it over and get back to our families and get this behind us. But the other side, of course, is that I'll miss the interaction with you folks. I certainly would like it to be face-to-face, but I miss interaction with you folks. It's been a fun 8 weeks, certainly on my side of the fence. I've enjoyed meeting you. The assignments, I'm working on them. I've got 70 to do. They take about an hour each to read and go through and get feedback put together. But I will have them to you by Friday, last day of class, or sooner, as long as fast as you can to get them cleaned up. The exam, I think we've talked about it, but just one more time to make sure to bring the temperature level down. 2 parts, closed book. Second part's easy. I'll be sending you out on Monday the name of the case and the actual exam. I'll take out the questions, but the actual exam as to what you're being asked, essay format, etc., it'll all be there, the weight will be there, and time will be your enemy on the exam. You've got 90 minutes for part 2 and 90 minutes for part 1, so do a time appreciation as to how much time you have to answer the questions, and when you hit that time, quit writing, go on to the next part so you don't run out of time. That's what really will be the killer in this thing. On part 1, they're similar in kind to the things we've been doing on the discussion site. Half a page, 3/4 of a page, sort of a response to some question about strategy, concept, notion. Nothing you have to memorize, just stuff we've already internalized through the duration of this course, or models you've applied, things of that nature. So you'll be ready for it. I'm comfortable that it won't be a surprise. And I offer this to you too, and I guess it's a privilege for me that I've been doing the grads MBAs for about 16 years now, that I still get calls and inquiries from folks, 2000, 2001, 2002 class, who take the time and do me the kindness to bounce an idea occasionally as to what I might suggest or whatever. My point is simply this, that my door is open to you even after this course is over, in your day jobs and other things. If you want to just stay in touch or want to bounce an idea back and forth, I'm available to you as a sounding board. So we did away with the Senate, I think, back last week and other things, so it's the same idea of a second sobering thought on things you're doing. What's in the news today? Let's talk a little bit. First, Elizabeth May comes to mind, and there was a press dinner with the senior folks in government and bureaucracy and politicians and bureaucrats all getting together. And Elizabeth May, bless her heart, and I have to say I've not met the lady, but I've read a lot about her. She lives on Salt Spring, which is the major island just off Vancouver. Everything I read and hear about her, she's the type of person that you admire. Environmentalists, we don't agree politically, of course, on the sense of political ideology, but I respect and admire, and she's a hard, tireless worker. And for some reason that night, out of character, she may or may not have been into her cups, but she said things that were, I know she regrets. But my point is simply this for all of us, is that you can build, like Elizabeth, a brand over the 20, 25 years, and all you have to sell, both you and your company, is your brand. And she has really tarnished her brand in 15 seconds by ill-timed humor or something she hadn't meant to say. And I do hope that she will recover. She deserves to recover, and I hope we're not too hard on her. But anyway, her brand was certainly tarnished by a 15-second, and that's the lesson for us, is watch those 15-second intervals. Canada, we've lost a soldier, a sergeant, Dorian, leading a patrol. Kurds, this would be northern Iraq, coming back in on patrol. Front line, miscommunication with the Kurds behind the wire. He and his patrol got shot up. He was killed. 3 of his soldiers were patrol members were wounded, and it's a tragedy. We can raise questions as to why Canadians are on the front lines over there. I didn't think that was supposed to happen. He's part of the special forces. Anyway, disappointing thing all the way around. What to say other than a brave soldier and somebody who'd rouse the Queen's shilling has gone down, and I hope our politicians are using these assets wisely. Prisoner sues BC after segregated for punishment for self-harm incident. Basically, the folk who was incarcerated had a long history of mental health issues, which raises the question why he should be in there. He slashed his wrists, lost a large amount of blood. As a result of that, they placed him in solitary confinement. And I guess my question here is, it just, one, raises that issue again of, mental illness in our province, and whether we're being penny wise and pound foolish not to provide the services for these folks, but simply incarcerate them. And secondly, he was placed in solitary confinement. And my concern here is civil liberties, human rights. Is that really a cruel and unusual punishment to put somebody into solitary confinement, particularly if he's got, as stated here, a long list of mental health issues? So it's something that we need to look at as leaders in the community, and that's what you are and will be. Social media brings the workplace harassment rules into play for men. A couple of TV reporters, Toronto men, were making obscene remarks over a TV reporter, female, got picked up by social media on one of the little cell phone things, got posted up onto the site. They were called into question, even though this took place after hours, got called into place, and the two businesses involved, Hydro One was one, Ontario Hydro Corporation, and I forget the other company, but they have dismissed the individuals involved. And so it begs the question, one, of course, is the danger about the social media and Facebook and what you have up there, and HR folks looking at that to get some sense of who you are, the dangers of stepping through that looking glass and participating in this online world. But secondly, what are the implications of that in your off hours? Can your employer call you into question and fire you for remarks and things you make that were picked up sort of off the record and posted onto Facebook? Certainly worth a conversation about the dangers of Facebook and things this week. Toronto man wins a controversial police carding case. And here we have a Sudanese, recently arrived in Canada refugee, got $27,000 in damages, but basically the police stopped him for no apparent reason and ordered him to take his hands out of his pocket. He refused. And with that, the policeman smashed him in the face with his fist. And when asked about it, apparently there's a carding policy that policemen, it's a police form called Police Form 208, and folks on patrol are asked to fill in these to give evidence as to how many times they interact with the public. So they're out there getting their cards filled by such situations like this for no apparent reason, stopping people, filling out cards, and it goes to their job performance and their salaries and whatever that they do this. In fact, I've often, there's evidence of that in there's lots of these traffic stops for safety belts and running red lights, etc. They set up these stations, and it's very much part of the policy of issuing tickets as a way to promote, and they're considered in their performance evaluation, as well as the city fathers give the police department an assignment saying we need to raise the revenues taken in on tickets and parking or whatever. And so they've got a job, and it's a distasteful one. They've got to go out and find ways to raise this money. And carding is just one way that causes me concern, is whether or not it's constitutional to stop you so they can fill out a form as evidence of interacting with constituents. To me, it strikes me as being totally wrong. And the judge felt that way too. They gave him $27,000 for the incident. Interesting. Harper's been invited with by the CBC and the CTV and Global Television Network for their traditional get-together debate with the political leaders for the election, and he's rejected it. He's following Hillary's move of saying, I don't want to take such a large stage. He said he'll have 5 small staged events where he gets a chance to talk to Canadians, but he doesn't want to open himself up to questions on a broader scale, and no big surprise as to why. I think we've said in this class he's been on a frolic of his own on a number of issues, and I think now he's going to have to answer to Canadians as to why he did this without these sort of discussions. Interesting picture here on the monarchy, royal baby's birth. We donated a snowsuit and $100,000 to a pro-vaccine group here in Canada to help immunize Canadian children as our gift to the new baby. But it raises the question for me as to the role of the monarchy in Canada. We have a brief discussion about, and indeed, if I put it to you, what's the difference between Canadians and Americans? And at times, notwithstanding the Americans are formed on a republic, which is a constitution that gives rights even to the minority to be upheld, and it starts off sort of we the people, showing that the individual is at the center of the universe down in the States, or should theoretically, according to the Constitution, and that state works for the individual as opposed to the individual works for the state. In Canada, it's kind of the other way around. We also have a constitution collected, as we've said, over a number of documents over the years. And here we start off with We the People, which is more about that, correction, not We the People, we start for peace, order, and good government, which is more about that socialist collectivism sort of concept. And so there's that difference, of course, between the countries. But often I think the thing that makes us different is simply that we have a queen. We have a Queen of Canada, a monarchy. And if we didn't, we'd have President Harper. And I think we'd slide down that slippery slope, and maybe possibly Medicare makes us somewhat different. But I prefer to keep the monarchy and keep the Queen, and it's just one old fart yelling in the distance. But this week, let's talk a bit about the monarchy and the role it plays, and does it in fact help us from sliding down that slippery slope towards a President Harper. We could talk about that today. Big spread this week on mortgage rates, and what they were was 21.46% in September 1981 was the 5-year mortgage rate when it peaked in Canada. 21.5% in Canada in 1981. And of course the concern is that they sense that we have inflation coming back up, and we may have to raise our interest rates, and won't go back up. I don't believe it'll go back up to 21% unless inflation really gets out of the way. But it doesn't take much for it simply to go back to historical levels of a 6% mortgage, which was not unusual in Canada. But what would that do to your mortgage payment and your bank loans, etc., if that was to happen? And so the message is clear. We should be getting ready for the gathering storm. But I have to say, I don't know how government's going to do it. We'll talk a few minutes with the debt load provinces have and the federal government has, and other nations around the world. The debt load they've printed with this quantitative easing, very few countries can afford even a marginal raise in interest rates, because it just eats too badly into their cash flow just to pay the payments. I see Kerry has been over to meet Putin, and they've exchanged a basket of potatoes. Kerry gave the Russian foreign minister in Paris in January a basket of Idaho potatoes, and Putin, bless his heart, has responded, given Kerry in this latest visit a bag of Russian potatoes, which is interesting. But I guess what comes out of this is again the tension level between the Russians and the Americans and the rest of us has been increasing. It's nice to see them still talking this way, but there's a growing polarization in the world between those for America and those against America, and it is moving quickly into this once you're either with me or against me mentality, and it's happening. And so we need to look a little bit at that and watch it as it grows. The United States is had a summit to test its relations with the Saudis, and the new king, Salman, senior gentleman, has just been in power for 4 months, has said thanks but no thanks, did not attend the summit, to express his displeasure the way America was operating in its dealing with Iran, and its position may or may not be with respect to Iran and nuclear weapons. And recall the Saudis and the Iranians are very much fighting for the center of the stage in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia, and as a result, and Persia, and as a result of that, we have this tension. And the Saudis are concerned that America is shifting slightly from solidly in their camp to somewhat more towards the center. In fact, it's strange today when you read the papers, you get a sense that Israel and Saudis are closer aligned than America is these days, which is completely foreign to what it might have been 5 or 10 years ago. But we can look at that relationship with Putin and where it's all going. All right, let's see, that was for this paper. Oh yeah, we had one of our large whales hit on a bow of a cruise ship here just off Victoria, which by itself is sad. But I guess more importantly is that the tanker threat, the increased tanker threat going back and forth, there'll be over 720 new tankers traversing up and down the BC coastline as a result of this LNG, 720 new tankers. And of course, with the sound of these ships, and there's lots of evidence showing that the sound is distracting, it's causing difficulties for the whales and their birth areas, etc. And so we have to look at this and the impact on the environment. Certainly we need the oil, we need the revenues. The province is desperately in need for extra funding, but at what cost? And so we could talk a bit about the environmental concerns, and also keep in mind that off BC, we have not tapped into, but we know we have great oil reserves and great gas reserves just off the Haida Gwaii. And we have not tapped into it yet because of our concern is if one of those drilling platforms lets go, like BP in the Gulf, it'll be a total disaster for our pristine coast. And so we have to stand on guard with respect to the environmental and do this thing judiciously, but there's got to be a balance, being right willing till the Hun, as I am. This is a story about an ombudsman asked to look at a welfare access. Need my glasses on to read this stuff. Here we have a situation of folks who are down and out. 2 weeks ago, went down to the social development office. There's a 1 hour period that is open. They went down, they lined up for the hour period. Couldn't get in to see a social worker, told to call back, put the name on a hotline. They did that, said they'd get back to them within 5 days. They've never got back. And all they wanted was a small fridge and a stove, a $150 check to cover this. Didn't get it. And I guess my message there is, again, that guaranteed annual income, we could do away with the whole welfare office altogether, and just each one of these individuals, 2 of them living jointly in a room, would have $1,000 each, and they could buy their own refrigerator and would save a barrel of money off the bureaucrats and the helplines, etc. And with that, it goes on to say here that they now have social assistance that must be done online. Well, how are these folks that can't afford a stove and a fridge going to have online and the Shaw cable, etc., to do online applications? Yes, they can troop down to the library if they have a library card, and the whole thing is topsy-turvy. What we're doing, like the Alabama literacy tests, what they had back in the States, and in order to keep the black folks out of the universities in the 50s and 60s, they had in Alabama they had a literacy test. There were questions being asked, but the test was not much about literacy. It was about the history from the perception of the white folks in the South as to what the world looked like. And so a black man or black woman taking this test was unable to answer the questions. So quite legitimately, they failed the Alabama literacy test and couldn't get into the universities because the test was biased in such a way that only white folks could respond to it. This reminds me of the Alabama literacy test. You need an online computer and service and printer in order to respond these days. Even seniors, how do seniors that are not literate with respect to online work even compete? They're being cast aside. Brewery Colmonton is opening up a university course for students that want to get a degree, or a diploma rather, in becoming a brewmaster. That may be a job for me in a little while. May line up for that. Space Mines need UN Solid Body Conference. They're forecasting that the Canadian Institute of Mining at their annual conference said it's not too far out in front of us. We're going to be mining asteroids as they go by. But the question becomes, who owns it? Who's responsible for safety? Who's responsible for cleanup? Remember that space junk we talked about 2 weeks ago? Who's responsible for all that? And there appears to be nobody responsible for that. So they're suggesting some UN body take charge of that. And again, it's this idea that, as good as an idea it is, it's this giving up of sovereignty of nations to this one world order, central authority, the UN, to control it. And we're going down that slope right along as we move towards it. LNG sees resistance on a bumpy road ahead, according to our Premier, Christy Clark, saying the First Nations are voting on pipelines and part of the process, but they're voting against it. 3,700 people in that particular First Nations group up there voted against it. And we need to rethink this. We need to look at this closely, because on one hand, the First Nations getting Canada $7 billion a year. $7 billion a year to your taxes and my taxes go towards supporting First Nations, of which there are not a lot. I mean, if you take the card-carrying members, and I stand to be corrected, I'm going to say there's less than 150,000 card-carrying members, First Nation, living on reservations. There may be another 800,000 living in large cities like Vancouver and Toronto, et cetera, and making their way in the community and going to universities and running businesses, et cetera. But the actual ones living on reservations, about 150,000. I stand to be corrected. We have that debate this week. But if all that is true, $7 billion each and every year is a big chunk of change from 34 million people. It's a big chunk of change. And so where does the $7 billion come from if we can't develop some assets and collect some royalties and collect some taxes? So I don't have the answer, but it's worth a debate between the two competing thoughts, that environment is an issue, and it's a big issue up here, and not just on the LNG plant. We'll talk about the Site C Dam, which is also First Nations being interrupted and mercury content in the water. It's a challenge that has to be find a way around here as we go through it. So worth a discussion this week. And what's this one? More report on business. Well, Air Canada is adding flights, and the U.S. carriers are cutting back. So with the low Canadian dollar, the high American dollar, with the cut in fuel costs, the U.S. carriers are feeling the stress and the strain of all that. The Air Canada and WestJet folks in Canada have a better than level playing field competing against the American cousins, and so they're cleaning up. They're expanding their airlines into the States because we have the dollar advantage, and so it's working for Air Canada. But they've also, greedy little monkeys, they have increased the number of seats on the plane these days. And if you do that, when you do this, I've just come back from Alberta a week or so back, and it struck me that first thing they ask you to do after you prepare your carry-on bag to make sure it doesn't have any liquids in there and no grenades and guns and all that magic stuff, and you take your bag through the thing, get it fitted, then just before you board the plane, they say, would you like to check it through? As there's not enough space in the overhead bins because we've added too many seats, can we check your luggage? And that just drives me to distraction. The other thing they do is, and again, I stand to be corrected, but I've been told that they turn down the oxygen level a little on these planes. And so I don't know about you, but I can tell you both my wife and I coming back had that flu, had the cold. And I talked to my brother-in-law, who's a dental surgeon in town. He just came back from Ohio with the same problem, that you get this germ, this flu, when you get off the plane. But the pilots, I believe, if they keep the door closed up front, have a separate source of oxygen going through, so they don't get the flu. But for us folks carrying in the cattle class, it's quite dangerous to your health, the flu. And so I'd like them to expand back out the seats a little bit. I'd like to see them increase the oxygen level, because they say it saves some fuel to cut us down so sharp. But I'd like to talk a little bit about that today, and Air Canada and WestJet, are they doing the right thing, or are they losing their mojo? Rural Internet users, Auction Airwaves, 42 new licenses for $25 million have just been acquired. A lot of this we used in rural Canada, but it speaks again to the Internet of Things. We've talked about business models and the demise of business models, and so to open up a conventional CRTC license for a television or a radio, and all the bureaucracy you have to go through and the towers you have to put up to run a radio station or television, it's highly expensive to have that infrastructure and put in place and the regulations to monitor. And I can go do the same thing today. I can set up like we are now. I can set up a television station just like we're doing now, no regulations. I don't have to worry about that. I can set it up. I can collect ads for this video we're making now and put it out, or for a radio station. I can play music, online music on my own little private radio station for subscribers. I can do this all now. The Internet of Things, this collaborative commons, we don't need to think in terms of CRTC anymore. We can do this as this individual is, just getting a license for an airwave to put out something to Canada's north, but we don't even have to go that far. The whole industry of radio and television and CRTC and Canadian content, I think is going to feel a lot of pressure with the Internet of Things. What do you think? Governments across Canada are bracing for a looming crunch, political dilemma. Again, we've talked about the interest rates. I don't think we're going to be able to do that just because our debt's so high. We'll talk about that in a minute. The nations are so high. Canadian firms are sowing fewer seeds and acres of soybean and grain because of the high harvest we had last fall. The actual production of grains and soybeans are going to be less this year, and that will impact, I guess, on CNN and CPR. If you're in the stock market, their volume of business may be declining, particularly as their oil is maybe increased the other way, may offset it, but it's worth looking at. The oil sands in Alberta, I see here that the Asian investors who rushed in here, were encouraged to come in here by our Canadian government, etc., are now getting second thoughts, are now getting squeezed, and as things close down and the dollar for oil is causing a lot of these things to be questionable, they're not just upset. It says here that buyers are getting into a rage. These people from Asia who have bought are getting very hostile with what's happened in Canada, and so there's great growing dissatisfaction. I see Rona is downplaying a suggestion about a merger with Lowe's. Now having done the mergers and acquisitions, to me there seems to be some merit for Rona and Lowe's to come together, but they're fighting it. They're trying to turn around on Rona, and they may be able to do it. And here's the one about Europe's debt. Just read some numbers. Ireland has got 109% of their GMP. The UK is 89% of their GMP. Spain is 97%. France is 95%. Italy is a whopping 132%. Greece is even higher at 177% of their GMP. Cyprus is 107%. And Japan is about 233% of their GMP. The States is about 110% of their GMP. And so when you have that sort of debt load, how can you raise the interest rate? We've already talked in this class that $285 billion is what America pays right now for its interest on its $18+ trillion. At marginal rates, interest rates close to zero. If it goes back up to 4%, we've said that that payment will jump from 285 to $845 billion, a fourfold increase. That'll carry right straight through for Canada, for BC, for Ontario, for you and your mortgage, etc. That just a normal increase back to 4 to 5%, and that wave is just out in front of us. And there's lots of talk about going back out for the interest rates to decline. Again, I question how it's going to happen, but they say that it could happen. So we have to watch for it and be prepared. What else? Yeah, Greece, we've talked a bit about. It's given up its emergency reserves at the IMF to meet a debt payment. Roughly $1 billion it paid off, and good for them. And the sense is the ball is now in the court of the Europeans to say, okay, come back in now with the handout that you're going to do and been talking about. The Europeans aren't yet in a rush to do that. They want Greece to carry on implementing these full reforms and cutting back and selling off assets and stopping payments and pensions. And so there's a lot yet to be done. But we need to watch that because that can ripple, as we've said. But more importantly, what's interesting here is the role of the special drawing rights of the IMF. Not really part of our strategy course, but it is part of the vehicle currency options. And increasingly, my reading is telling me that there's a growing appetite by China and other nations to get the IMF on side and the special drawing rights on side, as that'll become the new currency for us, and possibly even include gold in its backing. Right now, the major players in there do not include China, but it's coming up for renegotiation in about the next 12 months. And I would be surprised to see China become a 20% player in the IMF special drawing rights. And if that happens, that completely tips the balance of who controls it. And it may well then lead to the special drawing rights of the IMF to be our new currency. And so we need to watch this as business folks and the way it's all heading. Japan's debt we've talked about. Oh, interesting here, executive compensation. Companies like CIBC, Barrick Gold, Onyx, Air Canada, Loblaws, MD Partners, Yamaha Gold, etc., are all being under attack by the annual shareholders meetings, saying we have great disagreement with the compensation plan for the senior executive. We want to vote and a say in this. And it appears that most Canadian boards do not like this advisory role of shareholders in talking about compensations and to get involved in it. And I think we can understand why. But it's just one more indicator of this gap between the rich and the poor that we need to be aware of and look at as it unfolds. Industry with a bright future. I was struck by this story about solar, that the independent funded think tank called the Solar Foundation looked at the solar industry in the States. And they've added workers 20 times faster than all other industries in the U.S. economy. So there's a real move to growing solar power in America, and more power to them. They'll be growing another leg in their economic stool if they can catch up with the Chinese on solar power and the technology behind that. And so we watch with interest. They picked, as a matter of interest, First Solar Inc. as the choice to invest in. I think that's all for that, right? No, Brazil. Oh, yeah, Brazil. Brazil's coming up for the Olympics in 2016, but it's a basket case. The falling economy, government in crisis, real estate market is cooling like mad. 20% drop just this year alone in the value of property down there. High interest rates, high inflation. And yet, outside investors, to include Canada, we have the Canadian Pension Plan Fund Investment Board just put $1 billion in down there. $396 million US in down there. And the Chinese are now looking at in a big way and holding a forum down there that they want to invest bigger, in a larger way in the Latin America and the Caribbean states. And the Chinese have already taken over most of the Caribbean states with this go mentality we've talked about rather than chess. They have been investing in a very soft way throughout the Caribbean. And we have to be careful here when any country invests in you. Is it foreign direct investment? Is it hot money? Is it in and out? Is it something they can get their money back if something turns sour, they can withdraw quickly? That's not the type of investment you want for foreign direct investment. We want the long-term buying assets, things you can't run with in a hurry. And that's the type of investment seems to be flowing into Brazil. And keep in mind, Brazil is the engine of South America, and very much dependent on which way it's going to take it. So that would complete, I think, what I wanted to talk about today. I encourage you, as we wrap up our course, to find that 20 minutes a day to do this. I mean, this is the end of our session, but many of you share with me how much has changed your life to have this opportunity to sit and talk a little bit about emerging issues and how it relates to business, how you take what's on the front page in the business section, draw some conclusions and try to merge them together to protect your family, protect your nation, protect your business. And I encourage you to keep on doing that. Find those 20 minutes a day. Make your boss and your colleagues understand you need to close the door for 20 minutes a day to become that leader we've talked about in this class, to move you up to the wisdom level as opposed to just somebody who's acquired the science of strategy and the competency to apply some tools, but it's the critical thinking that you need. And it's that 20 minutes behind the door for a few minutes that will help you on the way to do that. It'll change your life. Anyway, folks, I've enjoyed this course. I've enjoyed the course itself. The dance is just about over. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.